recording this right. Now this meeting's being recorded. Okay, so what is critique? Right up here, Wikipedia tells us this is not to be confused with critic. Okay, so critique is going to be a method of disciplined, systematic study of a written or oral discourse. So it's a method. It's going to be disciplined, systematic, rigorous, but it's also a study. It's a method of study. Study is something which is going to produce understanding for us. It says here of written or oral discourse. We can extend that to artworks as well. We can understand artworks as a particular kind of writing. We can understand games as a particular kind of writing. We can understand music as a particular kind of writing as well. Moving on, although critique is commonly understood as fault finding and negative judgment, it can also involve merit recognition. And in the philosophical tradition, it also means a methodological practice of doubt. Okay, there's a lot here to unpack, right? So first of all, critique is not just being negative. It's not just being, critical. It's not only doing deconstructive criticism, but we also can basically bring constructive criticism into the game as well. So that would be merit recognition, right? And as well, there's a note here about philosophy. So in philosophy, critique means something very particular. The methodical practice of doubt. We might remember this from René Descartes in his Cogito, right? It was from a place of doubt and from a method of critique that he was able to produce the cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. So that's sort of the context there. And the last thing here that I want to read is that the contemporary sense of critique has largely been influenced by the Enlightenment. For those of you that don't know, the Enlightenment is an intellectual movement from the 17th to 19th century. And it's going to focus on, Enlightenment critique focuses on prejudice and authority. Because the Enlightenment is largely characterized as a period of secularization. So they're spending a lot of time trying to analyze systems of power and systems of prejudice that we had socially inherited from religious dogma, right? Now our understanding of that has expanded quite a bit, but we do want to still see critique as a system of analysis, right? Of understanding how things work, whether that's power, whether that's prejudice, whether that's identity, whether that's economics, and so on. We could speak at length about this. So yeah, just to review here, it's a method of study which develops and produces knowledge. It pertains to discourse. And yeah, we want to just reemphasize that this includes texts, which would be things like books or essays, or talks, oratory, modes of dissemination, but also artworks, music, games, literary texts, dance pieces, theater, you name it. This is going to be an exercise of judgment, but it's not exclusively going to be an exercise in fault finding, right? This is going to be important. I'm going to show another example here to sort of offset this here. And yes, of course, it's something that we've inherited from the Enlightenment. So where do we find critique? I already mentioned that this is something we find in philosophical texts. This is something that you find. Art criticism is also something that embodies critique in many ways. Literary criticism is going to be the evaluation and interpretation of texts. Musical criticism is going to do the same thing with music. This can be applied to many, many different realms of cultural production. But critique also plays an important role in education. And I want to say something about that because it's going to be something that you're going to continue to encounter throughout your digital culture trajectory. So first of all, I want to say something about the institution of the critique, crits. Now, some of you who have friends in design or art, fine art, or even architecture may have heard of crits. Now, I think in various studio-based practices, so that means practitioners who have studio classes at the end of the semester or the end of the quarter, the end of the year, the end of their sophomore year, they'll have critiques, which are events wherein you bring in faculty from around the school, external artists and experts to come and give, while you stand there, critiques of your work. And this is, it's often characterized as something which is very stressful and scary, But also what's really important about this is it allows you to see your work, to have somebody else critique your work is to invite somebody to analyze it and speak to you about how they feel it works or how they analyze your piece of art to work, right? Peer review is going to be a more casual form of critique. This is something that I'm sure in English classes and in other environments in K through 12, or maybe even in English comp at ASU you've done. This is going to be a form of critique, right? You're not giving your opinion about what this person has done, but you're giving some feedback about the work that's going to help them to better it, right? I dropped a link here to this thing called CritViz. Maybe some of you have used this already, but CritViz is something made by professors here at ASU in the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering, David Tinapple and Lauren Olson. And essentially it allows students to critique other students' work and give meaningful feedback there so that larger classes can also have this critique experience. Yeah, and more generally in classrooms, right, we could say that if you handed an essay or a project and the instructor or another expert gives you some feedback on this, we can also understand this as a form of critique. Or it shares fewer characteristics with critique. So we can read here, a book review is a form of literary criticism, so it is a form of literary criticism, in which a book is merely described or analyzed based on content, style, and merit. What I want to draw your attention here to is that such a review may evaluate the book on the basis of personal taste. So as we go through, excuse me, for the last 30 minutes of the class here, the rest of the readings, I want you to think back and I want you to notice in those readings how infrequently the authors say something about whether they like or dislike Stardew Valley. In fact, there are only a few examples where they outright say, I loved this game, or these kinds of games I enjoy, right? But in other words, this is not a review, right? A critique is not a review. It's not something in which you're assessing, okay, 9 out of 10 would play again, right? But rather you're trying to understand how it works and how we can interpret it. An interpretation, actually, it's a great segue. This first piece here gives us a great intro to that. So Jason Sheehan's article comes from NPR, so this is going to be, as far as audience, we're thinking about people who are interested in culture, news, and politics. Basically, a lay reader, and this is going to be called reading the game, right? And this notion of reading a piece of literature, reading a game, reading a piece of music means in some ways to interpret it, to critique it. And so the takeaways from this, we're going to start kind of comparing these articles as we go here. Man, how do I get this thing to go away? This little go away. Go away. There. Oh, no. There. So the audience is going to be a public that's interested in culture. You may recall that the tone is playful and conversational. He's telling stories about his daughter. He's using quotations from his daughter. He's using first person. I do this, I do that. And in the end, we really don't know here. Let's see. Is this going to make that thing go away? Okay. We really don't know how the author feels about the game. We can intuit that. I mean, of course, this person took the time to go and write this article, right? He's not being outright dismissive of the game or criticizing the game. So he probably doesn't not like it, right? Obviously, he wants to draw attention to it, but he doesn't spend a lot of time saying, I like this game because, right? In other words, we might say that the thesis of this article, or at least what I identified to be the thesis, It comes right at the end, actually, which is maybe a little more common in these kinds of think pieces, that you don't necessarily get the thesis right up front. He says, neither way of playing is right. Neither one is wrong. It's just life rendered in 16 bits and full of chickens and monsters. So to give some context here, he says, okay, I play the game this way. I maximize my efficiency. I try and be a completionist, etc. He says, my daughter Parker comes to it differently. She's a 13-year-old girl, the betweeniest thing in the world. And for her, Stardew Valley is a life simulator, a pixelated primary colored safe space where she gets to practice being a grown-up. Here she can turn her coddled pet chickens off for the night when tending to them becomes a drag, and make connections with people who are bound and bordered by the parameters of the game that is so much easier to understand than the lawless chaos of the real teenage world. She knows secrets about Stardew Valley that I never will, because to her, it's a map to the world she is just beginning to understand, while for me, it's a spreadsheet of a system I understand all too well. And now his argument here is that neither way of playing, not his maximalist, highly organized and efficient way of playing, nor the sort of scattered teenager mode of playing is right or wrong. So now I want to open things up for a second here, because I think that maybe people have some feelings about this. I mean, I take from the discussion posts that have been shared already that a lot of people have a lot of experience with games and maybe come in with some presumptions. And I think that this is actually something that's worth debating, right? So my question to you now, and we'll take about 3 minutes. I would encourage you to join in with the mic. Is there a correct way to play Stardew Valley, or is there a correct way to play any video game?
I don't think there's a correct way to play most games, but specifically with Stardew Valley, it is very like open-ended and just up to the player, it seems, with like the simulation style that it has.
I feel like the correct way to play is however you want to play the game, like no matter what it is.
Yep, that might be a good take as well, right? Is that the sort of correct way is whatever the player brings into it. I think maybe that's something which Sheehan is arguing here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Other takes?
With video games, oh, sorry. With video games in general, I've kind of come to notice that they are just kind of a safe place to like experiment and research and learn.
In any case, we see that, I mean, this is a little tricky, right? Because there are certainly some examples where you find that in other games which are more let's say straightforward, there's maybe a way in which the game developers intended a game to be played, right? And that opens up another can of worms, right? If we say, I mean, I think there's some example of somebody beating all of Super Mario using like a muscle sensor to do all of the actions, right? Okay, this is not the intended way that developers thought the game would be played, right? They thought it'd be played with a Nintendo controller, right? And somebody has changed this, right? We can think of more egregious examples too, right? You can think about, there's many cases of the game Roblox, right? Which is a game, I know it's like rated to be open for children, and a lot of children play this game, and yet some people come in and are also like using the chat rooms to spread profanity or something like this, or other, adult content right now. Is this incorrect? Is this an incorrect way? How does this have to do with intention?
Did you intentionally mute your mic, Professor?
I did just now, just to let people chime in. I hear that Johan says it really depends on the game. Some games have an intended way to play, while others are more open-ended and accommodating. There are probably optimal ways to play if you intend to complete it. Yes, this is absolutely right. I mean, if I were to start off to play Witcher and I just went around and picked up different herbs all day long, I probably wouldn't complete it. But it might not be. It's obviously not the optimal way, but it's maybe not the wrong way. Johan chimes back in. For example, Call of Duty is very linear in the campaign, so there are obvious hints of what the devs want you to do, whereas in Doom, you can be more flexible with play styles. For example, you can choose to go Oonga Boonga and rush in guns blazing, or you can be a little cautious and keep your distance. Both are valid ways to kill enemies and get the job done. Yes, totally. Anybody else want to chime in? With maybe other examples too? Go ahead.
It's kind of limited to what the engine and the assets will allow you to do, but with that, you can pretty much do whatever. Like, for instance, speedrunners for Metroid and Halo will often note clip in order to get through, and even though that's not intended, it's an ability that allows them to pass through walls without cheating.
What is it? What is that called? Note clip? I don't know that.
Note clipping. So it's when you it's more of like a hacking term, but it can often be used as a way to like break games.
Okay.
But it can be done in the engine. And in games like Stardew Valley, there are ways to like get around objects like that as well.
Right. So mods, I mean modding or hacking in general, right? Yeah, they're absolutely sort of like community. I mean, what's interesting about like mods and hacking, I think, is that what it does is it expands the notion of intention, right, and how a game is intended to play away from just the developers and gives you more of a marketplace of different kinds of intentions, right? Anybody with the requisite technical skills can develop a mod, which expands the way that a game can be played, right? We're going to come back to, I'm glad that you mentioned also the game engine and what it allows you to do, because we'll come back to that when we get to the video and talking about procedural rhetoric. Okay, I'm going to put the chat away for a second. Again, feel free to interrupt me if there are questions that pertain to things in the moment. I won't be offended. Okay, so another thing, I mean, when I actually first heard about Stardew Valley, it was when I was reading about video games and mental health. There's a lot of literature out there about that. This is one of the less academic writings on it, but I think it's also maybe an interesting example. I wanted to give you all also a nice array of different styles of writing that weren't necessarily game reviews, but actually opened up something excuse me, opened up the game into a different kind of interpretation space. So here, in this article, we could say that the audience is a public who's interested in video games and mental health. The tone is really conversational. It's emphatic, so there are like different lines that are being skipped and words are being emphasized and bolded. It's even a bit coy, I think. There's a bit of kind of an online vibe here. And there's quite a lot of first person. And if we're going to talk about the thesis of this game, what I isolated here was something which came in, I think, about the middle. After Carolee had described her experience with the game and how she got sucked into it, her relationship with work and overwork, she says, how did this quaint pixelated slice of life game come to be my version of therapy? How has it been avoiding me to escape the black hole void of suck that is depression? It's kind of a weird story, actually, right? This is some of the emphatic coyness. It started with finding myself in the game, and then came the self-reflection, and then came the healing. So what she's arguing here is that this game, Stardew Valley, opens up a space in which one can see oneself differently. That's because there's a player that she identified with who is different than her, but similar to her in many ways. And it allowed her to see her own behaviors through a different lens and work through them that way, right? Even though she uses the word escape here, I think what's interesting is that she's not arguing that this is a game that allows her to escape her problems. It's not as if she just goes and plays this game and her problems disappear and then she comes back from them. It's actually a space in which she confronts her mental health head on. She confronts her proclivity to overwork head on by seeing this other person. She says it smacks her in the face like something that weighs 10,000 bricks or whatever. So before we move on, actually, I mean, because we have a little bit of time, I'm just wondering if people want to weigh in on this. I mean, the reason I also chose this reading, and really the reason I chose this game, is because, there's a lot of talk about mental health nowadays with the quarantine and staying level-headed and staying calm, in other words, right? And I'm wondering if any of you experienced similar things, or maybe saw in some ways like some problems even with like thinking about games as a mode of addressing mental health. I mean, I think this is a really interesting discussion, and absolutely something that professors and students around digital culture are very interested in.
I don't know if this is like a valid critique, but for me, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. The game made me feel actually the opposite. It made me feel kind of depressed because I'm an outside kind of person. I like farming. I like all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So just doing it on a video game was kind of more depressing for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very valid observation, right? I mean, I think the critique that comes out of that is, why is it that we need to, like, this is something which simulates an experience for us because modern life has disconnected us from these kinds of outdoor and natural experiences. And so that's actually what's going on, right? As we create a simulation of this when, instead maybe we could actually just go outside. I don't know if it was you, but somebody responded in their reflection that there was some irony about this. I think that's absolutely right on. I really think, I mean, I will also say, I don't think that this is a game that, is going to withstand negative criticism. And yet, I also think it's really interesting that people are saying that this game helps them deal with their depression, right? So it's sort of like, it's an interesting space. Does anybody else want to weigh in on the mental health aspect?
I feel like it could be a good way to like just disassociate from anxieties that you're having in real life. Like, I feel like if you're having a lot of anxiety about like, COVID or staying inside all the time, like a little farm would be a good way to like get out of your house and into quote unquote another world. Yeah.
Yeah, I would for one like a virtual bar where I could go and hang out with my friends nowadays. That would be quite nice. I can understand that. And I mean, I know this is also a multiplayer game. Has anybody played this game multiplayer? But I guess it's also something which, yeah, people can log on and sort of hang out together and do farm work together. I imagine that would be maybe a different experience, maybe less escapist and more, maybe more entertaining, more fun, more upbeat.
I mostly played it multiplayer, actually.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Can you comment on your experience with that?
It was a bit more, you weren't just like micromanaging, you were micromanaging with your friends. So it felt like actually running like a project than it did doing it on your own. I'm going to be honest, it actually felt a little bit more exhausting because of it, because we all were working for a set goal instead of just playing to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that reminds me of, you said micromanaging together. I mean, this reminds me of a game called, maybe some of you have played, called Overcooked. And this is one of my favorite multiplayer games because so quick, like what's so fun about the game is it becomes absolutely chaotic so quickly, right? And you, like, I always am shouting at my friends, and they're shouting at me, and we're slapping each other and trying to get each other to go and just cut the tomatoes to make the stew or whatever. And that's some of the fun of the game, is that
You're cutting out. We can't hear you.
We lost audio.
Oh no, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you just came back.
Yeah.
Oh, did you hear about Overcooked?
No.
You just
last
started
thing we
talking
heard
about
was-
it.
Yeah,
Wow.
we just heard that's some of the fun of the game, and that's all you said.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to work on getting another mic for next time, because this is unfortunate. But to repeat what I said, it's some of the fun of that game is that you try to go and multitask and micromanage with your friends, and it always sort of falls apart because it's always so chaotic. You're trying to get dishes together, and you're shouting at each other and slapping each other on the head or something like this, trying to get people to go and cut tomatoes to make a stew or whatever. But yeah, in fact, it becomes usually quite chaotic. And then it does feel good when you can fall into a groove and synchronize, right? And I think that's also a nice feeling. I'm sure that can be related to positive mental health as well. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that having like oh sorry.
Oh no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
All right. I feel like having like a farm or almost like a world that you can control, you have full control over, especially since like everything outside we really don't have control over with all this COVID stuff, is really beneficial. You know, like for depression, if you're like going through that right now, I just feel like having like full control of that is really helpful.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I can relate to that. I know. I mean, I've been somebody who's experienced anxiety in my life, and sometimes it's just really nice to go and organize my closet, and feel like or your fridge, right? You feel like you have control over that, and there's absolutely a way in which it seems like this game allows you to do that with your own micro world, right? Everything's in its right place, and everything is running according to plan. And what's more, you work day by day. Right? Everything is day by day. At the end of the day, you go to sleep just like every other day, and then you wake up and it's a brand new day, right? It's a brand new chance. Somebody else is about to share share something.
Yeah, I think like between your two examples, between Overcooked and Stardew, they're both games like based off of like managing your own self as a player, and as in order to move along. But I think the biggest difference is the rapidness of the games. I feel like Stardew is a lot more slow and tedious as compared to Overcooked.
Yeah, there's totally a way in which the pressure is on with Overcooked, right? Which resembles the restaurant atmosphere. I think they're trying to make you feel that pinch there, which lends itself to some of the fun, and also lends itself to being a bit more chaotic. So yeah, that's absolutely right. And obviously, it seems that people, the guy who developed Stardew Valley was interested in making this a more tranquil experience, right? But I want to make an interesting note maybe about Overcooked, and that'll lead to one of the later the PlayStation Dreamworld reading, which is that I played my game the game Overcooked with a friend of mine who spent 10 years of his life working in kitchens, and he couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand it. He said, "This is ridiculous. Why would you do this? This feels like I'm at work. I'm not going to do this with my free time, right?" So when we're talking about management, which is a word that you use that I think is right on. I think another way that we can think about these sort of game mechanics is that some of them have proclivities to cause us to manage ourselves, right? To go to work, as it were, right? And this also leads us back to the hyperemployment essay from Jan Bogos from the beginning of the semester, right? Where the bounds between work and play are constantly disappearing, right? Something somebody else mentions or something I think Ellie Bryce mentions in her article about this. Okay, let's keep going. I do think the mental health aspect of this game is absolutely one of the most interesting. So keep that in mind. as we go towards the pressure project, in which you'll all have to write your own critiques of the game. Okay, I had a lot to say about this video. I was also happy to include a video for you all because I think, again, it's important to understand that critique can come in many different formats, right? And a lot of video essays that are popping up now. If you're interested in, if you particularly like this one, let me know. There are many other YouTube channels that are making really interesting critiques of games and culture and so on and so forth. This is an interesting venue for doing critique nowadays. And I guess what's interesting about this too was, I think by far and away, this was the most academic text. The video was actually the most academic text of all the examples that we had. So the title, which is quite a mouthful, and I don't think it needs to be so long, Transcendentalism, Gentrification, the Procedural Rhetoric of Stardew Valley. Okay, I mean, he only really mentions gentrification, and transcendentalism isn't really defined, but I think what's really important about this is this idea of procedural rhetoric. And we'll say something about that in a second. But to my mind, the audience here is clearly not the general public. This is not going to be your gamer enthusiast, but rather people in a subset of academic intellectual discourse called game studies. People are interested in analyzing games as texts. Another circle in academia would be called digital humanities, and they're also interested in the way in which software can be read as literature. The tone is heady, but also it's grounded and conversational. I think that there's enough sort of questions here that makes it easy for him to speak through this in the video. Again, as you're considering writing your own critique, I mean, think about the tone that you want to employ. I think all of these would be acceptable, but it's important maybe to commit to one or another. And his thesis here is actually the basis of procedural rhetoric, right? So he says, Stardew Valley chooses not to simulate parts of its world that don't support its narrative of this dream life of farming, right? So, okay, let's back up. I want to go to this essay for a second. We only have a bit of time, but I want to get to this because it's going to be the basis of your assignment. You need to say something about procedural rhetoric. So, and so actually, so you guys know, there's the transcript on this website here too, which can be helpful. So he says here that this idea of procedural rhetoric is something which allows him to talk about games. That they are, in fact, games are interactive simulations with implicit or explicit goals, and that meaning in video games, and here he's citing our friend Ian Bogos, meaning in video games is constructed not through a recreation of the world, but through selectively modeling appropriate elements of that world. Procedural representation models only some subset of a source system, in other words, the world, in order to draw attention to that portion as the subject of its representation, right? So his argument here is what? If we get towards the end, or it's back on my slide anyway.
We lost audio.
You don't deal with genetically modified organisms, right? You don't deal with any of the sort of
We
strife.
lost audio for a second.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
I think it may be your headset. Is your mic tied to your headset?
I have my headphones off, so I'm not sure.
I don't know if it's the microphone though, because I see your little microphone on the screen where it says mute. It's still going green when you're not talking.
Okay, yeah, that's weird. I have like everything closed here too, so I'm not really sure what else to do. Oh wow, there's a lot open back here. I don't know. I'll close this stuff and see if that does anything. I have no idea.
When you go mute, it appears that you can't hear us as well. So It
Oh, is
might
that
be
right?
an issue with Wi-Fi.
Maybe it's a Zoom thing.
Probably a Zoom thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about it. I'm going to maybe use my phone or something next time, actually. In any case, I want to just get to the end of this here because we only have a few minutes. So thank you all. In any case, what's interesting about Stardew Valley, if we take seriously this idea of procedural rhetoric, and we use that as a framework for analysis, we can understand the argument, as it were, of Stardew Valley. And what Gregory Weir says the argument is that there are parts of the world that don't support its narrative of a dream life of farming, right? So anything which is not chaotic, or sorry, anything which is chaotic, anything which is stressful, anything which has to do with, say, the farm going under, with having a bad crop, a bad harvest, right? Dealing with eminent domain by JoJo Corp or something like this. All of these aspects of dealing with farming in the real world are omitted. They select few aspects which are pastoral, right, and represent its kind of dream of farming, right, and represent farming as a kind of utopia. So that's a way that we can understand what Stardew Valley does. It represents for us a pastoral ideal of farming. Do people have questions about that? That's kind of a big aspect of this section of the class, of this module. So I want to make sure we feel like that's clear. I can't access my chat thing here, so we keep going. Okay, so then we only have a couple minutes, and I want to stay true to time. We'll maybe get to the end of this some other time. In any case, I want to draw your attention to your pressure project, which is going to be to write a critique of your own. So I would like for you to write a 500-word critique of Stardew Valley using the proceduralist rhetorical analysis from Anne Bogost. And so here I basically put that quote again. So what I'd like for you to do is to pick a specific mechanism within Stardew Valley. So again, this could be something about
We lost audio again.
our world in some ways.
We
And following Bogo.
Audio was lost again.
Yeah.
Okay, I was on a roll. That's too bad. Let's see if I sell.